everybody. Welcome to iCast Guidance, your weekly Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPG podcast, where every week, Rich, Garret, and I pick up a subject around the culture of gaming and discuss it with you. So, without further ado, sharpen up those daggers. We're going to get started right now.
Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I am flying solo today because we've got some issues with weather and time commitments and things of that nature. People are busy. And I think we all know how that goes. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I decided to come up with, today's podcast is really about that. It's about time. It's about this kind of idea that it's really hard to put a table together. It's really hard to balance your expectations in this game, especially if you're a DM or a GM. It's hard to put together a group of people. And there's also this side of things about how when, given the fact that TTRPGs are gaining in popularity and that they have an incredible allure, especially when the first time we see them is through one of the big shows, right? We kind of see this fantastic time that's being had by people around a table. We see the creativity. We see the immersion. It's really beautiful. And so for those people who have never really played before, that as a first experience, which is what we kind of talked about last week, is part of the allure. But there is a built-in antithesis to the TTRPG for most people. There is this mechanism that is part of the game that automatically repels people. And it has to do with time. Time is, probably the key factor in all of this. You need to be able to really commit. Now, I'm going to create a few examples here today for ways in which you can get people who don't have time to engage in the game on some level with you, right? But for the most part, if someone's curious about this world and I'm explaining my game to them because they've got all the good questions, and I'm saying to them, I've been playing on Tuesday nights for years, and a solid segment of my campaign will take easily a year. We played The Curse of Strahd for a year and a half. They just blank over. They just get this look on their face like, wait, what? You mean like every week for 4 hours or 3 hours for a year? I'm like, yeah. And that's because most people understand a game to have a time constraint or a time commitment that is within the realm of recreation. It's going to have an amount of time committed to it that says, let's sit down and play this game for an hour. Like chess is a great example. Chess uses a clock and you can decide how much time you're going to put on each side of that clock. And if the clock runs out, somebody loses. This is normal. Sports. It's Super Bowl Sunday right now. And, not that I'm a football fan, I'm not. But, for the Super Bowl, there's a clock. It stops and starts all the time. So it's not really a reliable clock. But, again, there are time commitments that are understood. These games don't always have that. Oftentimes they don't. We, as TTRPG players, I think, really relish that idea of longevity. We relish the idea that we can go on and on and on. And this is what gives us a chance to really experience and understand our characters and therefore experience and understand ourselves. This is how we get there. It takes time. But time is something most people either A, don't have, or B, don't think they have. And that's kind of an interesting thing there, something I want to touch on in a little while. And so when they sort of understand that, we're going to get together every week, you get two flavors of people here, right? They're so invested in wanting to learn this game or a game that they're like, yeah, I'll be there every Sunday at 1. We play to 6, we order dinner, whatever. And then the first Sunday you've got scheduled, 2 of your 5 people are like, oh, shoot, I forgot. I can't make it. Or, this is old news. We all get this, right? So there's that flavor of person that, they sort of commit and then they don't make it. And then, of course, there's the flavor of person who never really gets to put their toe in the puddle and say, oh, yeah, I want to try this out. But, oh, God, no. Yeah, I'm never going to be able to do that. Sorry. And then they lose. They lose the chance to see what this thing can be about. So as DMs and GMs and enthusiastic players inside of this space, how do we get people to commit to this space? How do we give them a space that they can participate in? And that's today's topic, really, right? I think that one of the most obvious choices here is going to be the one shot, right? A one shot, we understand a one shot is something that takes place inside of a single day's play. I don't know about you, but I know a lot of dungeon masters, game masters that have a hard time wrapping their head around the one shot. If you're a participant in world building, the world of high fantasy, you enjoy building these massive creative spaces out there, then how could you possibly put that into a single day? But it's possible. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that now and how maybe that could get someone to come along. Like, what are some of the key components to a commitment to get something done in a single day? What are like the 5 bullet points to make that happen? And in a lot of ways, the question that I'm asking you right now, what are the 5 bullet points? That's one of the ways. It has to do with the organization of your material in such a way that you can strike through it as sort of a series of checkboxes. What are the bullet points? We call these things story beats or chapters. And this is an opportunity for you to say, all right, I have an adventure. I have a thing I want my party to do. What is the end goal? And the end goal is to recover the amulet from deep inside the cave. Okay, well, what are going to be the story beats to getting this amulet? Well, first you have to ask yourself, does the party start understanding that this is the mission, or do they discover that this is the mission when they begin the game? And my advice there would be they know that this is the mission when they start. See, one of the key things you have to do as a dungeon master in organizing your game is to make sure that there is some structure. This is not railroading, right? But the more variables that you present to your players, the more places they have, the more opportunity they have to take it off track, to that's a bad metaphor to use if I'm trying not to be a railroader. But in order for you to sort of stay on target, you have to steer the ship. And so I would start out in that scenario in my hypothetical game saying, okay, you have been tasked with finding this amulet. The amulet has a magical power that, when worn by the local shaman, emits a magical energy that allows this village to prosper. It allows them to harvest their food. It is connected to the ground. It is connected to the air. All magic that emanates in this space that all the people in the village use emanates from this amulet. But the amulet was taken, or it was lost, and it's your job to find it. Okay. So when this adventure begins, the party is told this by the person who is charging them with that thing. All right, so story beat number 1, introduce the task, right? That's where we're going to begin. And then we have to decide, well, how do we prepare? Like, what is the party going to know they have to do next? So let's pretend that we're going to break this down into 5 elements, 5 chapters. And then we got to ask ourselves, well, how long do we have to play this game? Our one shot is going to usually take at least 3 hours. Okay, probably 4, but it might be hard to get that new player in a 5-hour game. So let's say we've got 3 hours. And I'm going to say that in that 3 hours, if we broke that up into 30-minute periods, that's 6 30-minute periods in 3 hours. On top of that, we're going to take that first 30-minute period and we're going to use that to sort of just go over how the game's played. You've got new players at the table. Let's talk to them about how we do things. Okay, so we got 30 minutes of introduction. We've got 30 minutes each for each of the 5 story beats. Cool. That means that if you just have a light timer in the back of your head, you're going to be able to know whether you're on track or off track, and when you as the GM have to move it along. Great. All right, so like I said, first thing we're going to do is after the introduction, we're going to spend the first 30 minutes of gameplay introducing the task, right? We're going to set these guys on the road to adventure. So now you're going to take that first 30 minutes and you're going to break it down into maybe 3 parts, okay? Those 3 parts are going to be 1, task them with what they have to do. And that might take 12, 13 minutes with questions and role play and various details. 2, what do they need to prepare for this? Right. And 3, how do they find out what their next step is? In other words, one section of your 30 minutes should be the segue into the next 30 minutes, right? You want to give them a very logical decision to make, and you want them to feel like they're making that decision, not you're pushing them in there, but that they are. So for example, if they're in the tavern, we're starting out cliched, they're starting in the tavern, and they're asking questions of people like, what do you know about this amulet? Do you know how it was stolen or how it was lost? Whatever the case may be, the answers that they're going to get from the people that they talk to should all point in one direction. If you give them 3 different directions in your answers, like one farmer says, oh, well, I saw the hag in the woods sneaking around town the other night after she was gone. We noticed the amulet was missing. All right, that answer points towards the hag. The bartender, the tavern keeper, when they talk to him, he says, no. What I heard was that the priest himself stole it and took it deep underground because he formed a pact with an evil demon and the amulet was the price. Well, now they've got to talk to the shaman in town to find out, if it was him. And then if the third one is a third thing, you have too many directions that the party can now go. And now they're going to want to explore all of them. Instead, all of the answers should point towards the same thing. So maybe it's the actual shaman. The shaman formed a pact, or there's a suspicion that the shaman has been up to something, and it is in fact him who caused the amulet to go missing. And then now you've got a kind of an interesting little story twist in here, right? Because the very person who tasked you with going to find it is in fact the person who lost it. And that's an interesting level of complexity. Maybe he's ashamed that he lost it. Maybe he realizes that the town or the village is going to collapse without it. He doesn't have the power to get it, but he wants to put it onto the players. So whatever you decide to do, make sure that your answers point towards this idea that the party knows where to go. Great. Now we're into story beat number 2. And story beat number 2 is going to be the beginning of that journey. All right. So they're all going to go and they're going to question this shaman. If everybody thinks that the shaman has been up to somebody, maybe they're going to spend some time watching him and spying on him. They're going to stealth around at night to see what his activities are. They're going to see if they can connect any dots. And this is your opportunity to create segue number 2. You're going to create tension by talking about what's going on. Like if they decide to go watch that shaman, then that shaman should reveal something. Whether it's every night at midnight, he goes deep into the temple's basement and does something. He performs some kind of prayer or ritual. But whatever the case may be, story beat number 2 is going to build some tension and it's going to point towards the segue into story beat number 3. Now, remember, all of these things are pointing towards the last and final showdown. And that might be with this demon that the shaman made a pact with. I'm not going to play this out completely through all these story beats because I think you get the idea. A one-shot needs to be organized. And within those bullet points of organization, preferably 5, the third bullet point in each one, in other words, I should say sub-point, points towards the next one. And what this does is it gives your party a chance to move forward. Now, you as the GM also have the responsibility of staying on the timer. The party could easily stay in story beat number 2 for way too long. All right. So now you have to be able to sort of create an impetus to move them to number 3 without it seeming like you're forcing them. So yes, the shaman goes into the basement of the temple every night at midnight to perform a prayer ritual that helps him sort of, whatever the case may be. Well, if they're down there watching this too long, or you as the DM drag out the details of the story for too long, you need to kind of create a situation that says the shaman now begins to leave the temple. He's walking right towards you. You have an opportunity to move. What are you going to do? They're probably going to move. I don't think they're going to engage him in combat, but that's going to now shift us into the ability to go to number 3. They gained their information. Now I'm pulling this out of nowhere, right? This scenario that I'm creating for you right now to sort of talk about story beats, I'm making up as I go along, but I'm hoping that it illustrates the point for you for this is how we create structure inside of our game. It's a structure that allows the players to think they are making the decisions themselves because they want to have fun. They want to feel like they have agency over their own story and their own game. And you give that to them. You're just this underlying framework. All right. So low time commitment. This is the thing that we struggle with as organizers of the game, getting our people together. And if you have a person that's curious that wants to get into the game and can't really, and you're going to set up this one shot, that is one way to kind of bring them in. However, there is this other side of things that is equally frustrating. We as GMs and DMs do a ton of planning. And I have to say, my game, I'm really lucky with my game. My players have completely cemented themselves in the routine of the Tuesday night game. So much so that when we shifted to an every other Tuesday model, because it just seemed like we were in a period of time where people were missing the game a lot. And I thought, well, maybe if we go to every other, people will be more willing to commit. After about a month and a half, 2 months of that every other week thing, some of the players came and complained and said, we want to play more. And I was like thrilled about that. That's such a nice thing to hear. And when your players want you more, it probably says you're doing something right. So when you have, and I guess my point there is that I'm really lucky to have a group of people that not only wants to play more, but is really rigidly involved in the Tuesday night. But how do you get your players to sort of be at the table more often? Is this even possible? Well, one thing that you can do as the GM at this table in organizing this space for them is feel out what's missing. What is it that is keeping them from the table? You know, in other words, I always talk about what I refer to as uninterruptible time on my calendar. So as an artist, I create a slot in my calendar of studio time. That is the time I go to my creative space and work. Now that is uninterruptible time. What I mean by that is imagine a scenario where you're trying to schedule a doctor's appointment with the eye doctor. And the person on the other end of the line says, well, I have Tuesday at 3:00 available. And you say, no, I can't do Tuesday at 3:00 because I have a job. I'm working. You would never consider trying to take off because that's your job, right? I mean, maybe you could. Don't get me wrong. I'm just trying to say that the job is the one thing that seems to be the uninterruptible time. Like we're not going to thwart that. Fine. But can you create priorities and a hierarchy in your world of uninterruptible time that functions like the job? So for example, as the artist, I create a time slot that no one can get in. So if somebody says to me, oh, I have an available appointment on Friday at 3, I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I have a commitment. I can't put that there. Whereas most of the time, all of our other time outside of our job becomes interruptible time. It becomes the type of time slot where we prioritize other things over what we want to commit to. And this is normal, right? And this is normal for our players. Our players are out there trying to conduct their lives. They might have kids, or they might have jobs, or they might have, who knows what. But how do we sort of express to them, what is the slot of uninterruptible time that I can create for them? In other words, you say, like this is what we do when we organize. We're like, okay, can we all play on Sunday at 4? And everybody's like, yes. That is the point that you say, okay, that I want to be uninterruptible time. I want you to take that time slot now. If that's something that you don't work in, that you don't have to take the kids to a soccer game in, then I want that to be uninterruptible time. And I tell them, I'm like, that needs to go on the calendar. This is our commitment. And I really make that clear. I'm like, look, if someone comes along and says, I want you to do X for me on Sunday at 5:00, you say, I'm sorry, I have a commitment Sundays from 4 to 8. I can't put that there. Now have that player make the person making the request find the other time slot. If you always low prioritize your game, you're never going to play. Everything will always be able to get into that slot. I think it boils down to how seriously do you take the commitment to the story and the commitment to the game. And it's kind of one of these things that in like psychology, where if you don't do a thing over and over and over again. I'm trying to think of an example of this. You know, you need to get the oil changed in your car. Okay. You've been driving around and that 3,000 mile mark has clicked over to 5,000 miles. And then and you hear from some people that 5,000 is okay. So then that 5,000 mile mark clicks over to 6,000 and maybe even to 7,000, but you still don't go get the oil changed. But you've had time and you have the money. Maybe you do. All right. I'm just going to create a scenario here. But you still don't do it. Did you ever have that? Did you ever wonder like what stops you from doing a thing you're totally capable of doing? In psychology, a therapist would tell you it's because you don't want to do it. And even if that situation that you ignore creates a problem for you, like it's going to create some wear and tear on your car's engine and shorten the life of your car, you, for some reason, want that to happen. That's what you want. So I'm going to say this to my DMs and GMs out there. Your players that don't prioritize the game, don't prioritize it because they don't want to. And listen, this isn't an accusation, and this isn't to sort of create a situation of dismay or despair. They don't want to. So this is information for you, the DM, that says, okay, my players don't want to prioritize this situation. What do I do next? Well, that's a tough road to follow, right? And because I've tried all kinds of things in this space to say, oh my God, what do I do here if I had players that didn't want to prioritize my game? All right. So I've come up with some solutions that are, you know, a little bit draconian and create problems for me with other people. I've come up with situations that I feel like are maybe, I don't know, pie in the sky that I think are going to work, but then don't. I come up with situations that, you know, at the end of the day, basically, it's like it almost doesn't matter. I don't have the magical solution here, but let me tell you what some of them are. And I actually really want to know what some of yours are. How do you get your players to prioritize your game and create uninterruptible time, or to create desire? And I think, you know, I just brought up therapy and psychology for a minute here. And I think this is my problem, right? My problem is that I put my enthusiasm and expectations on other people. And then I get upset when they don't have that level of enthusiasm that I do. And that's not entirely fair, because why should I expect them to be as enthusiastic as me? It's them and their life. And you get the point. All right. So I got a couple of ways that I do this. So one, this one idea that I had where at the beginning of a campaign, every one of your players gets 3 tokens, 3 gold coins, like your inspiration coins, right? You hand them 3 coins. Now, let's say you've got 5 players, you're handing out 15 of these tokens, 3 to each. Every time they have to miss a session, they hand in a token. And once they're out of tokens, they're out of the game, right? Okay, draconian, authoritarian. It's like, oh my God, what are you, a monster? Like, who is this monster DM that's like, you know, but now all of a sudden you can imagine where we all have that player that's always there. You never have to worry if that player is going to be there, right? You know that they're there every time. Like in my game, it's Garret, who's often on this podcast. Garrett's always at the game, right? So Garrett's holding on his 3 tokens, right? So maybe there's now a mini commerce system at the table where somebody at your table gives the person who's always absent a token or 2 in exchange for, I don't know, a pizza or a magic item in the game, or who knows. But there could be a way in which, but what you've done by handing out 15 of these tokens is you have committed to 15 individual absences from your game across a span of time. You know, I think this could work. It creates a little bit of a sense of, at least in the back of somebody's mind, they're like, oh, maybe I should prioritize the game this week instead of going and doing X because I'm running out of tokens. It's not like I'm not trying to hold this thing over the head that says you can't play in my game if you don't, you know, if you miss more than 3, you're out. It is a little bit, but it's more to sort of say to them, hey, you know, the game's important. Maybe you should think about whether or not you should go do that versus come and play my game. Now, of course, if your players all of a sudden are out of tokens, Well, now you have no game. And what did you do? You just sort of like, shot yourself in the foot in a lot of ways. So what do you do now? Well, I've had this problem too, right? During the pandemic, we played on Zoom for a long time. And I hate playing over Discord or Zoom. I hate it. I will not do it. I feel like it is, and look, I know there's a lot of people out there that are going to tell me I'm wrong. Discord and Zoom bring a lot of people together, and I think it's a wonderful thing. I think for people that enjoy that game space, awesome. As a DM, for me, it's a nightmare because number one, I talk to my students all the time about this notion of connection as a student to your professor, how eye contact, note-taking, presence, all of these things create a connection. And it's good for you as a student to create that connection because when it's time to get that grade, if you're that student who is unavailable, you're checked out, you're on your phone, you're not in the classroom, you're not taking notes when things are going on, that is never going to help you. And in a game, it's the same way. Like if you're engaged and you know what's happening turn after turn in combat and you understand where things are, you're connected. And the DM feels like you have a presence in that game. Over Discord and Zoom, that connection is inherently, in a best case scenario at 50%, because number one, your participants don't look directly into the camera. They look at their screens, which is sort of adjacent to the camera, but it's not the same thing. So right off the bat, we've got a diluted sense of presence with the players. Okay, this is a problem, I know. But then there's this whole other thing of just the inherent level of distraction a screen causes in the first place. So all your players, especially during combat, are probably engaged in some other thing. And it's really, really hard to become totally connected there. And in the past, I've had players that have had varying levels of commitment. Some players are just abhorrently distracted the whole time the game's going on. It gets to their turn in combat. They don't even know which enemies are dead. They're attacking enemies that have been dead for a full round. And it's like, completely destroys the immersion. So anyway, I understand that Discord and Zoom and these types of interfaces allow us to sort of do things we couldn't normally do, but I don't like to play in those spaces. So, on some level, presence and this idea of having the 3 coins and having this commitment to coming to the game is sort of like a level up. It's a level up in terms of that presence and commitment. And as a DM, I want to feel that. And as players, I want to feel that not for me. This is not an egotistical thing. I want to feel like my players want to play this game. We as DMs and GMs put a lot of work into this. And we want to feel like our players are there. I feel like that with my game. My game feels that way. But what about yours? Do you have this problem? Like, do you suffer from this with your players? And what do you do about it? So what I want you to do before we go to the break is I want you to go over to Wither and Bloom Studios on YouTube and find this podcast posting on YouTube. Check it out, listen to it there, but that's a great place to comment. Let me know what you think of that. How do you get your players engaged? And if you're a player, how do you feel about this? Do you think about that, how your presence at a table impacts your GM or DM? Have you had these conversations with your GM? Let me know. I want to know more about this. And when we come back from the break, I'm going to read a listener comment from last week, and then I am going to dig into the second half of this show. We're going to come up with some more strategies for getting the low commitment player present at your table. All right, we'll see you in a few. Hello, esteemed listeners. So listen, you made it this far in the podcast today, which means you're invested. And I thank you for that. I am so glad that you are listening to this show. We work pretty hard here at putting these on, and I'm not going to lie, it sometimes is disappointing when the numbers are low. So here's the goal. I want to set a goal for you. If you could, tell a friend. I want you to say, hey, you like TTRPGs, you like Dungeons & Dragons. I'm listening to this podcast, and it's awesome. So here's a link. Go check it out. And if you could do that to 2 people, we would be eternally grateful. We are trying to get those numbers up. Also, you could head over to YouTube, where you can find us at Wither and Bloom Studios, and you could check out the live streams that we do on Tuesday nights. Or you could check out Dungeon Dramatics, which Rich does on a fairly regular basis. You could check out all the different content that we make. And then, when you realize you like that, you could tell 2 more friends. And hopefully, they'll tell 2 friends. And before you know it, we will have millions of people checking out this podcast. That's the goal. Anyway, I really appreciate having all of you here. So why don't we get back to the show? Cool. Thanks. All right, we're back from the break, and I want to read a comment from a listener on last week's show. Now, last week's show was about making combat more engaging. It was a good conversation, and I think we got somewhere with that. But we have a comment from one of our regular listeners, rabbit.com, on that show. And it's a rather lengthy comment, so I'm not going to read the whole thing. But there's a couple of things in here. Rabbit goes into some interesting aspects of Daggerheart. And Daggerheart's got some ways in which combat becomes more interesting just from the standpoint of a lot of the crunchier mechanics are removed, and we move to a much more narrative-based combat situation. But what Rabbit says in this comment is we were talking about how sometimes when we're in a dungeon maze, things can get rather boring because it's sort of like you come to an intersection. Do you turn left or do you turn right? There's 2 doors, one on the left, one on the right. And we kind of go through that real dry, A or B decision-making process. And in part of Rabbit's comment, it talks about that. So Rabbit says, a maze is actually one of the random encounters I have in one of my Daggerheart supplements. Daggerheart is different because it doesn't rely on fixed maps, in that here is the layout, there's this trap here, there's that trap there. So I've designed a series of potential rooms, hallways, encounters, and based on if the group succeeds or fails a roll to navigate, they may encounter a specific type of room. It begins with the players just walking along a road, and then 1 or 2 of them slip into a sinkhole. So sure, they could avoid the encounter entirely by not choosing to explore, but getting those 2 back up under the surface is difficult. Once they all group at the bottom, there is another quake at the entrance that seals them in. They have to find their way to a different exit after a number of navigation checks. So this is kind of interesting. I'm going to stop reading it there. This is kind of interesting because what this boils down to is something similar to the encounter table, right? You populate an encounter table with a series of things that could happen depending on how checks play out. You could do this in a dungeon as well, where it's like, yes, I know my dungeon has 14 rooms, and I know that those 14 rooms each contain the following stuff. And then depending on how they have survival checks or whatever the navigation check is that's being utilized, they're going to encounter things a certain way. So if checks are going bad, they're probably going to be coming into 14 of the 14 rooms, right? If checks are going really well, they might streamline that exploration to get the 3 or 5 best rooms in a dungeon and accomplish whatever task it is they're supposed to accomplish quickly. And this is great because it kind of takes the whole, let's draw a map, let's reference a map. Don't get me wrong, I love maps. But then we kind of have to like plug our way through that, especially in the bigger, more complex maps. You could be in there forever. Dungeon of the Mad Mage is like kind of like that. It's gargantuan and there's so much going on. So I love this comment from rabbit.com. I feel like that really helps make situations easier. And for those of us that are talking about the low time commitment player, this is actually one way that you can kind of build that right into your game, right? You want a one shot with a dungeon in it? Okay, fine. Let's almost remove the map entirely, or at least the GM has the map on the side for reference. But they don't have to physically have this sort of like fog of war reveal of every 10 feet of the maze. It can kind of be something that happens due to a series of good or bad checks. All right, cool. Let's keep going. All right, so another situation where I could imagine bringing in a low time commitment player. And it's funny, my wife is like this. My wife really loves the idea of playing Dungeons and Dragons or a role-playing game with us, but she wants to do it like 1 month. She's like, hey, I'd love to get in on a game. And then for the next 3 months, she doesn't have time. So one way to get a person like that into your game is you create an NPC for them. It becomes a player character, but all of a sudden now a guest comes in to play a role in your existing game. This can be, number one, this is a really nice surprise for your players. You bring someone in unexpectedly. Maybe they're not even at the table at the beginning of the game, but they come in when the party encounters the NPC and they sit down. You've briefed them, like for the whole week. You've kind of been talking about what this NPC is, what they do, how the person that's coming in is going to play the NPC, notions of cooperation or antagonism, whatever the case may be. This person, this low time commitment person who just can't come to all your games, comes in and sits down. Now, this could be on a one-off where it's one time that the NPC comes to the game, or this could be on a recurring basis where every once in a while that NPC pops up and that person, the person says to you, hey, I'm able to play in 3 weeks. Do you have any space for me at the game? Well, if it's logical and feasible that the NPC they typically play could show up, cool. But if it's not, well, maybe it just doesn't work out. But this is a way somebody can have a sporadic presence in your game. Now, for that person, I also like to, this is my personal preference. You might decide something different, but that person, in my mind, would be best suited to play the same NPC every time. So you are, that guest of yours then can deal with that role in a much more immersive way. It becomes confusing for your players if the sporadic player comes in and plays a different NPC every time. Now, maybe you as a GM or DM or your group would understand that. And that could actually become a really interesting element of the game, right? Where, your friend who can only make every 6th, 7th, 9th game, every time they come to the table, the party knows, so-and-so is here. And this is going to be interesting because now what are they playing? Maybe they're playing an enemy. Maybe they're playing, a shopkeeper. Maybe they're playing a familiar person, a beloved member of the story that the party really gets down with and likes, on a regular basis. It could be any or all of the above. So I love this idea for the occasional drop in. Now, part of me wants to reveal to you how do I do this? My wife is coming back into our regular game, but my players don't know this. I'm going to partially rely on the fact that they don't listen to the podcast right away. They don't listen to the podcast at all, some of them, but some of them do. So if you guys are listening, don't reveal this to the other players, that there's probably going to be a guest appearance in the future. I won't say when. And I'm actually really looking forward to that. But again, this time I've got her set up so that she comes in as potentially a recurring person. So I'm just going to leave that there. But that's something I like to bake into my game because it's exciting. Not to mention, there have been people who have come and gone at our table that have been guests at the table. And I kind of think sometimes I'm like, wow, I should look into bringing them back. So this is a way that you can bring a new person up to speed with a game fairly simply. Maybe they drop in for an hour. It's like, yeah, you want to try D&D? I've got a spot for you. There's this NPC you're going to play, and this person is this. See if you can drop into that role. You can come over for an hour and get into our game, have a slice of pizza and enjoy yourself and see how you like it. And then maybe that person now all of a sudden has the impetus to commit for the long term. So yeah, definitely that as a way to get a low time commitment person into your game. Let's do another one. So one other angle for people that I think could kind of be interesting, and this is a rare one. This is one, it's going to be hard to encounter this person because if they've never played before, right, this one's going to be tough. But let's say they have played before and they're really interested in your campaign, but they just can't commit the time. And you kind of want to do them a solid. You kind of want to bring them in for something. All right, this one's good. I will oftentimes have another person design for me a city, or design for me an artifact, or design for me an NPC, and give me all of the facets and details of that person. Right. And this is a way a person outside the game can contribute to your game and feel like they're connected to the game, but maybe they just can't make the game. Right. So I love to take a person and say, hey, I got an idea. Since you want to be involved in the game, could you create an NPC for me for an upcoming village that my party's probably going to land in pretty soon? Here's the general gist of what's going on. And, you can kind of give them as much or as little of a framework as you want. And now you as the GM get to play that NPC that was created by an outside person and say, oh, okay, let's see how this is going to go. And that outside person gets to check in and say, so what's going on with the NPC? What's happening? How did it play out? And now all of a sudden they have this sort of sidelined tertiary relationship to your game that they had a level of contribution to. And it can be as big or as little as you want. It could be an entire town, right? Imagine if an outside person has some time to spend, on a Thursday night at 2:00 in the morning because they're up and they're an insomniac, and they write an entire description of a village that's going to go into your homebrew world. It's like, oh, wow. Okay. How can we connect this to my storyline? Will the players land there? And if they do, how much, do you want to do on the side with me to talk about what's going on in that village? What are some underlying mysteries that are happening there? What is the general provisions keeper like? What's the system of government? What's the system of commerce? What are the tensions present? And that person now can kind of write or do what they want on the side, and they are now playing a part in your game. Another connection to the role-playing game that's low time commitment because they can't make the scheduled thing. So you can, as a GM or DM, you can be as inclusive or exclusive as you want in these situations. But I find when someone takes an interest in what I'm doing and I respect that person and they just don't have the time, I'm like, well, I'm going to try and make some room for them if I can. So think about that for a little bit. That's definitely another great way to do that. Now, I want to take a minute and just plug some of the things that we're doing as a group on Wither and Bloom Studios. One of the things we do is every first and third Tuesday of the month, we are playing live on YouTube, and that is our Rising campaign. This is the second season of our Dungeons and Dragons game. We get together and we start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern time. We're live on YouTube and we play. Now, we've built in some pretty interesting ways in which you, the viewer, can participate. We have a super chat and a tipping system that allows you to actually purchase boons for the players or for the dungeon master. And it's low commitment. It's not a lot of money, but you can actually participate. You don't have to. You can just come along and watch the game and participate in the chat just like anyone else. So that is the first and third Tuesday, 6:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time of every month. Now, on the second and fourth Tuesdays of the month, these are the alternating weeks, Tuesday, starting at 7 p.m. We start a little bit later on this one. We are playing The Pit. The Pit is an arena combat game that we're utilizing the Dungeons and Dragons rule framework. And we have a massive coliseum that we put on the table. And then the players come to the table with their minis, they drop them in, and the DM drops a foe in front of them, and they have to fight that thing to the death. And then in the second half of the Pit, they fight each other. And so if you guys are out there and you like the granular combat and you like the strategizing, then the Pit is for you. And we do that again live. We've got good cameras on our minis so that you can see what's going on. It's new. It actually begins on February 25th. So that's going to be the first release of this. So definitely don't look for it before then. And yeah, there's probably going to be a little bit of a learning curve to some of the camera angles and all of that. But we're looking forward to perfecting that system. So you got that itch to watch some D&D combat? The Pit is for you. And last but not least, in March of 2025, we are going to be releasing some pretty exciting new things that are coming down the pipeline. So if you're not following or subscribing to us yet, please come on down, come over to YouTube, Wither and Bloom Studios, and follow us because we've got some cool things to throw your way, which we're excited about. All right. So lastly, I am really interested in hearing about your stories as a DM, GM, or player on how you deal with time commitments and your TTRPG experience. It's something that, it requires time, but we all can't sync up our time perfectly all the time. DMs and GMs, how do you deal with your expectations for your players? Like, do you find yourself completely distraught when your players can't participate or they won't participate just because, they're enthusiastic on one level, but they just can't give you the time on another? Tell me these stories. I want to hear how your game goes. I really like to take these situations apart and feel like I am not alone in this situation. All right. And from the player standpoint, do you have guilt? What happens in your game? What happens when you don't make it? I mean, we have 6 at our table. So if 2 don't make it, we can still play. If 3 don't make it, we're in a spot. What is it like at your table? And do you have guilt? So let me know. Come on over to those comments and let me know. And I'm going to let that wrap it up for me for today. I hope to see you next time for iCast Guidance. We got a cool topic coming up next week, and I will talk to you then. All right, everybody, take care.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to iCast Guidance. iCast Guidance is produced by Todd Lambrix, Garret Brennan, and Rich Frohman. We drop this podcast every week, and we are looking forward to having you hang out for more. Don't forget to head on over to Wither and Bloom Studios on YouTube, follow our channel, and definitely comment on what you see there. We will probably read those on this show. Thanks again for listening. We look forward to next time.